So lambda refers to anonymous functions defined in a shorthand method. Shorthand method. So usually lambda lambda is used lambda is used mostly in minifying the logic, minifying the code. Lambda is used to minify the code. So minifying is a programming technique that you might have learned in CSS and JavaScript also. When we are using CSS JavaScript, you might have seen min.js files, or like min.css files, min.css files. And generally, if you know CSS and JavaScript, minification is a technique generally used in JavaScript and CSS to reduce the file size by reducing the number of lines written in a code, but keeping the performance and functionality same. That we generally do by using lambda. Technically, lambda functions are also known as arrow functions. Because sometimes people ask about arrow functions, right? Actually, if anybody is asking arrow functions, means he's talking about lambda, right? It is a shorthand way of representing a function, right? Let's see how to configure that, how we can configure. Actually, lambda functions, so lambda representation comprises of three parts. One is parameters. Second one is a fat arrow notation, which is also called as lambda notation. And third one is the statements to execute. That is how generally we define. Actually, it's a simple technique of configuring. So let's see one simple option how we can handle that. So here we are configuring a lambda expression, lambda functions, how the functions are written. Let's see. So lambda function, first let's create a function here. I will remove all this logic here. Yeah. Let's create a lambda function here. So usually lambda represents a parenthesis and implies a fat arrow, and generally it will contain, suppose, a statement hello Typescript, something like this, Typescript. So this is what actually a lambda notation. That means this parenthesis represents a function, and this fat arrow defines the definition, and these are the statements in the function. And very important, all lambda functions are usually anonymous, means they don't have a name. Then we have to define a reference name for them. So where hello is equal to this lambda notation. Usually this lambda notation, so defined in this way. So lambda notation means actually what is this happening here is the lambda notations are defined in this way. So that means actually this is represented like this. This is a function. We are defining a function. This is a function. And this is the definition of the function. And this is the statement here to print. Now, instead of writing 4 lines of logic, we are wrapping this in 1 line. This reduces the size occupied by the file, and it reduces the load time. It improves the performance of an application, especially when you are denoting by using this lambda. So that means now hello is a general function. And important is it can be defined. So with the lambda expressions usually can use different statement, like you can use a code blocks also for lambda, but we don't need any code block for lambda. Generally, what we have to do is it can have parameters, it can return those parameters and values, right? So then generally how we can manage that? So simply we write like this. That means we can configure where add is equal to. It can have parameters. So A, comma, B. So these are the parameters defined here. And here we are using implies. So it is returning A plus B. That is the addition. So this is a very shorthand way of configuring your function. Now I am accessing this here. So console.log. So log. Here I am printing that hello function is called here. And console.log. Here I am printing addition is equal to. I am calling that add function. Into that we are passing the value. So that is some 20 and 20. That's it. And when I compile and run this, so you can see the lambda functions. The lambda functions are working fine. That means the shorthand way of configuring and writing the functions. And actually, the shorthand technique of writing the functions, it even allows to use optional parameters. That means optional parenthesis also, right? That means suppose we have written the function like this. So where suppose some print is equal to some sample here, some value, where f1 some function is equal to. Into this function we are configuring. Without parenthesis also it can have. For example, you write here, so display is a function is equal to x implies, and that's it. So you can configure a functionality also. Console.log x is equal to, so plus x, like this. Without parenthesis also the lambda functions can be configured. And remember, they can have multiple statements. Obviously, if multiple statements are there, you have to enclose in flower brace. That means technically now x is considered as a parameter. So that means we are using so console.log, and here we are calling the display function, and into that we are passing some value, some 30.